Helene Reingold here again with Conversation with Art. Today we're going to talk about American art, American artists. But before I even begin, I just need you to know that I live in a part of Stamford. I live in North Stamford near the New York border. And every now and then my internet does something strange and I freeze. You will not lose the image and you will certainly be able to hear me. Okay, so I apologize for Optimum's poor service. And now we're going to talk about American art and American artists. And we're going to start way, way back. With this young lady, 1752. We know who she is, but we do not know who the artist is. He was an itinerant painter who never went to art school. The United States does not have an art school of any quality till the middle 1800s, and that's in Philadelphia, and we will get to that. So everybody has to learn on their own or they have to be apprenticed. And all of these itinerant artists were apprentices to sign painters, to furniture painters, and to house painters. They traveled from town to town, and they would live with the family they were painting. That was part of their fee. This young lady's name is Katherine Elmendorf. She's dressed as an adult woman, but she's really only 5. Her father was a congressman from Ulster County. So we had money in this family, excuse me. And we painted a flower in Catherine's hand. We have a flower in her hand. Anyone know what that might be? It's a carnation. And a carnation is a symbol of love and loyalty. We also have a tulip. Now, tulips are not native to upstate New York. So the inclusion of this tells us that Catherine's family was wealthy enough to import flowers and display them in their home. So we do not know the name of this artist. He was an itinerant artist, traveled from place to place. And I hope you notice that the head kind of looks like it's attached to the body because the artist would come with samples of different bodies and poses, and then he would just add the face. Katherine Elmendorf, 5 years old. This painting was done by a Scotsman who moved to the colonies, and his name is John Smibert. John Smibert was the first recognized portraitist whose name we know, And he does many wealthy Bostonians. And this young lady's name is Frances Brinley, and this is her son, Francis. Do you notice something unusual about the scale of these people? This is a very, very large child. And notice how long her neck is and how small her head is in comparison. Again, this is not an artist who was formally academically trained. Do we know anything about Mrs. Frances Brinley just by looking at it? Well, let's see. We know she's a mother, which is a classic Western art subject, mother and child, Madonna and child. We know she's a wealthy woman. Look at the clothing. Yes, heavy satin, and this color blue, very expensive color to dye. We have through the window an orange tree. Orange trees are not native to Boston, which means her family is wealthy enough to import and plant. She has an orange blossom in her hand, a symbol of motherhood. Mrs. Frances Brinley and her son, Francis, done in 1729. You might recognize this portrait. It's done by John Singleton Copley, and it's Paul Revere. But this is Paul Revere before he rode that horse. It's Paul Revere showing us what he does for a living. He was a silversmith, and these are some of his tools. Copley was greatly influenced by the artist we just talked about, John Smyberg, but the style is very, very different. The style is completely different. And he shows us Paul Revere, again, as I say, as a craftsman. We're not in his studio. His clothing is clean, pristine. He's got gold buttons on his vest, so we know he's successful already as a silversmith. This is a lot more polished and quite lovely. Copley was considered the best colonial painter before the Revolution. Paul Revere. I want you to notice the shape of his body. It's a triangle, the most stable shape there is. Artists all sketch shapes before they start actually painting. Paul Revere was painted with this symbol because he was a Mason. And the triangle is a symbol of the Freemasons, as was George Washington, as was many of our founding fathers. If you flip a dollar bill over, you'll see a triangle, symbol of Freemasonry. Beautiful shadow, wonderful reflection. Wonderful. Look at the fingers on the silver. Copley. We all know who this is. It's a full body portrait of George Washington, who before he became president was the commander-in-chief. And I hope you see the hilt of his sword. You have the eagle on the furniture, which is a symbol of the office of the president. You have the presidential seal on the back of the piece of furniture. And by the way, if we could get a little closer, this ink stand has GW on his initials. We're looking at a stormy scene through the window here and a rainbow through the window here. So we go from storm and chaos to a wonderful future. George is dressed as an upper middle class gentleman. Not as anybody famous. There's nothing here to indicate that he's president except the eagle and the seal. When we won our independence, people wanted him to become king. And he said, we've just gotten rid of a king. I will be the president. And this is how he chooses to portray himself. This is Gilbert Stuart. Gilbert Stuart does 114 Washingtons, but Washington only sits for 3. Gilbert Stuart was someone that Washington absolutely did not enjoy spending time with. He was addicted to snuff, he was gruff, and he was rude. But he does 114 of George. He just makes a copy when someone wants to buy one. Stuart does the first 6 presidents of the United States. Gilbert Stuart. We're going from portraiture now to landscape. And this is a view of the Connecticut River from Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts. Connecticut River flows through Massachusetts, through Connecticut, and empties into the Long Island Sound. And this is Thomas Cole's view of that. He was the first painter to venture up the Hudson River Valley, and hence we say he was the father of the Hudson River School. These were artists who left New York City because they all had a studio in the city. They left New York City in the summer. They did oil sketches of whatever they would choose to portray, and then they would come back to their studio in Manhattan on 10th Street and finish their painting. So they didn't really do plein air. They just did oil sketches. You know, plein air is painting the whole scene out of doors. And what has he chosen to show us? If we could draw a line right down the center of this landscape, we could really almost have two separate scenes. We'd have a scene on the right of land that's been developed and cultivated. We'd have a scene on the left of wilderness. People are starting to move from the colonies, or I should say the states now, they're starting to venture westward. They're changing the way the land looks. They're getting rid of the natural vegetation. They're killing some of the trees so that they can ultimately clear the land and settle. The concept of manifest destiny takes hold at this time, where we considered ourselves, the white man, to have the mandate to clear the land, to eliminate the original inhabitants, and to change it. Manifest destiny. So I ask you, do you think do you like that idea or not? Do you like that idea or not? I hope you see the storm here and the sun here. So you decide. Thomas Cole, father of the Hudson River School. View from Mount Holyoke, also known as the Oxbow, because we have a very slow-moving, older river, and ultimately this piece of land will become an island. Thomas Cole. Landscape. Weather, very important. He paints himself in here. It's right down at the bottom. And he does an interesting artistic technique. He uses the color red so that we will notice him. He has a red kerchief right at the bottom here. Artist, we're going to see that again and again. Red draws your eye. This is his easel. He's got an umbrella for the sun. And on his portfolio, he has put his initials, TC, Thomas Cole. Yes, this is a gorgeous flamingo, native to parts of the United States. Gorgeous flamingo. And this is part of a 435-page book called Birds of America that John James Audubon does. He travels through the US, recording animals, recording birds that are already on the way to extinction. He was born in Haiti. His vocation was ornithology, but he decided to do this to record some of these birds that he knew were going to be extinct based on the westward movement of settlement. Flamingo. He works in not oil, he works in watercolor, and it's so vibrant. Now, how does he do this? How does he get the bird to pose for him? He observes them in the wild, then he kills them, and then he wires the body so that he can shape and get whatever profile he chooses. He also likes to give us additional detail, which is at the top. John James Audubon. There are several hundreds of these Birds of America volumes, and one of them, about 3 years ago, sold at Sotheby's for $11.5 million. Charles Bonaparte, who met Audubon and was so enthralled with his work, decided to bring him and one of the volumes to Europe. Bonaparte was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte III, so he had access to very wealthy people. And the Europeans went wild. They'd never seen a flamingo. They'd never seen most of the birds that Audubon had in fact, selected for his book. So this is a period now where American art is starting to go towards Europe, The Audubon Society was not started by him, it was named after him, John James Audubon. A very famous painting, 13 feet high and 22 feet wide. It's so big that in 1897, when it was purchased by the Metropolitan, they hung it on the wall. And when they redid the American galleries, they actually renovated around the piece. Done by a gentleman who was born in Germany, moved to the United States, considered himself an American, even though he went back and forth a number of times, started an art school in Germany, in Dusseldorf. And we're going to talk about the Dusseldorf School of Art in a moment. He ultimately dies in Washington, D.C. So we're now looking at Washington crossing the Delaware. But there are several things that are wrong with this iconic painting. It was done in 1851, long after this happened, because this crossing happened Christmas night, 1776. All of the people are dead. You see Washington. You have James Monroe, third president of the United States, but he wasn't on that boat. This is not the type of boat they took. They took flat-bottomed boats that held 40 people. It was originally to transport iron ore. Nobody was sitting, people were standing. What's the most important thing in the painting, do you think? Not George, the flag. Leutze was very pro-American, very patriotic. The flag is the most important thing. Then we have George. Now, this crossing actually happened in the middle of the night, but that's not how Leutze paints it. If he had painted it in the middle of the night, in the middle of a snowstorm, we wouldn't have seen the action. Artists can do that. They can enhance, they can take what's known as artistic license. So the time of day is wrong, the boat is wrong. There should be more people on the boat. The river is wrong. The river is wrong. He didn't paint this between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. He painted this in Germany. And the river that he was familiar with was the Rhine. And so this is the Rhine River, and this is the way the snow looks, the ice flows. The Delaware River is much narrower and very different. And when it freezes over, you just have flat sheets of ice. So we're looking at the ice flows of the Rhine. Do you see George's horse? Aha, right here, white. Yeah. The hero always has a white horse because it's very easy to see him. Because when you're fighting a battle, you really would like to see your leader. This is the Pennsylvania shore. This is the New Jersey shore. And this is the Pennsylvania shore. Oh, no, but this was the Battle of Trenton. It happened in New Jersey. Oh, so Leutze doesn't even have him going in the right direction. Because if he had painted him going in the other direction, it would look almost as if he was going backwards. They attack 900 Hessian mercenaries in Trenton. It's Christmas night. These guys have been drinking all day. They didn't expect an attack. Washington captures all 900 and doesn't lose one person at this battle. This turned the whole tide of the revolution around, because prior to this, you had soldiers who were not being paid and they were deserting. These people didn't have shoes. It's the middle of the winter time. An eyewitness account said, I could follow the army because I could see the bloody footprints in the snow. Does this look like a woman to you? There were women soldiers in the Revolutionary Army. And we have dressed these soldiers in clothing that would identify them from different colonies. This gentleman is definitely from the West. This gentleman is from Maine. And one more thing that's not right, the flag. When the flag at this time was flown, it didn't have the stars of the colonies. It had the Union Jack, the British Union Jack, because we still belong to England. This flag comes along about 6 months after the actual date of this scene. But this is the painting that everyone recognizes as American. Leutze actually did 2 of them, but one was, and they were both in, one was in the Met and one was in Germany. And the one in Germany was destroyed in the Second World War when they bombed. Washington crossing the Delaware, Emanuel Lutzer. And so the gentleman here who posed for Washington was not a German, because Leutze couldn't find tall enough Germans. He enlists the aid of a soldier, to be the soldier of a gentleman named Worthington Whitridge, who was part of the Hudson River Landscape School and who was studying at the Dusseldorf school at the time. So this is an American. The rest of these guys were German models. Worthington Whitridge. Washington was about 6'1", 6'2", and he was a very tall man for his age, for the time he lived. And most other men were about 5'6", 5'7". So now you know the story behind Washington crossing the Delaware. Doesn't change the painting, but these are most people who look at this don't know. We're in the Midwest. We're in the Midwest now. We're in Missouri. And the gentleman who's painting this is George Caleb Bingham, who also was a student at the Dusseldorf School of Art. We're looking at an election in the western part of Missouri. And in fact, George Caleb Bingham was elected to the legislature a few years after this scene. This is purely an American scene. It's almost like a cartoon. Let's see if we can analyze this. What is happening here? Yeah, he's getting drunk. They're giving the voters free liquor. This gentleman is already fairly drunk. He's being held up so that he can kind of stagger up the stairs, swear on the Bible, and vote for whomever, I guess, gave him the free liquor. All the politicians are identified with high hats. You can bet that this guy got his vote. Here is George Caleb Bingham. Puts himself right in the middle. We can't quite see his face. Also a politician. These children are playing a game of dice. Rolling the dice. It's kind of like a crapshoot. This is called the county election. And by the way, the gentleman who won for this election was this gentleman in the blue coat. So Bingham uses color to identify the winner. Here's Bingham himself, the county election. This is George Catlin painting a wonderful portrait of a Mandan Indian chief. Here's the portrait. Here's Catlin with his easel, with the chief whose name is Four Bears, Four Bears. So Catlin does a painting of himself working with his subject, and here's his subject. He paints him proud, regal, strong, elegant. Catlin decided to travel west of the Mississippi to catch these Indian tribes before they themselves were going to become extinct. He does this in 1831, and in 1837, the Mandan tribe is almost decimated by smallpox. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous portrait. And I think Catlin respected this man. I think he thought he was a leader. George Catlin, Four Bears. Yes, I hope you recognize Benjamin Franklin. This is not a painting. This is a piece of sculpture, and the medium is marble. And the artist who did this is Hiram Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S, an artist who's born in Vermont, gets familiar with marble, decides to move to Florence, Italy. He wasn't happy with the quality of the marble that he found in Vermont, and he wasn't happy with the quality of the assistants that he found in the United States. He wanted to work with assistants who had a better comfort level with good quality marble. This is Carrara marble. This is from the area around Florence. But Hiram Powers was recognized as an excellent American sculptor. And so he was commissioned by the United States government that gave him $20,000 to do this Benjamin Franklin. It's larger than life. And I hope you notice on the tree trunk that it's scarred by lightning. Benjamin Franklin discovers lightning. This piece of sculpture is in the Capitol Rotunda, along with Daniel Webster. And if you looked at the video of the incursion in January on the 6th, you might have caught this statue. He's wearing exact copies of Franklin's clothing because these had been stored in the government in DC. And so he was able to look at the hat and he was able to look at the coat. I love the paunch. Benjamin Franklin, Hiram Powers. Oh. An expatriate did this. An expatriate, someone who was born in one country and spends most of their lives in another country, who actually was dismissed from West Point and moves to Paris at the age of 21. This is done by James McNeill Whistler, who loved Asian art, Chinese art, and I hope you see the influence here. He names many of his pieces with colors. He names it rose and silver, but we call it the princess from the land of porcelain, the princess from the land of porcelain. I hope you notice his wonderful screen, the wonderful fan, the kimono, and a gorgeous rug. This is a commission by this young lady's father, who when he saw the painting said, you know, I notice your name up here. I notice your name up here, Whistler. I don't like that. I can't see my daughter. And he wouldn't pay him. He wouldn't pay him. So Whistler has this wonderful painting and he shows it to his biggest patron, whose name is Francis Leyland, L-E-Y-L-A-N-D, who's a very, very wealthy shipping magnate in England. And he says, Mr. Leyland, are you interested in this painting? He said, well, you know, Whistler, if you will do my dining room, if you'll decorate my dining room, he said, we'll talk about whether I'll purchase that or not. And so Whistler does the room in Leyland's house called the Peacock Room, to show off Leyland's porcelain collection. I find my eye drawn more to the wall decoration and the ceiling. And of course, here is rose and silver in a very prominent place. The ceiling here is 13 feet high. The room is 20 feet deep and 33 wide. It's a big room, big room. Leyland looks at this and he says, well, wait a second. You've done this walls in beautiful peacock blue, and you've done this in copper and gold gilt, but you've really not focused much attention on my porcelain collection. Not happy with this. I'm not going to pay you. Well, he had already had, Whistler had problems not getting paid for this. So he had an arrangement with Leyland that Leyland could pay him 50% of what he owed him for the room. You can see this peacock room in its entirety at the Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C. It's quite gorgeous, quite gorgeous, the peacock room. James McNeill Whistler. This is 1865. What has happened in 1865? Yep, the end of the Civil War. And this gentleman has come home. He's got his jacket here, and his jacket is blue. So we know that he's a Northern soldier. He's come back to this wonderful wheat harvest, and he's holding in his hand a scythe. A scythe can be a symbol of the grim reaper. He's killed a number of people during the war. Wheat is a Christian symbol for salvation. This is Winslow Homer. Winslow Homer, but we're used to seeing Winslow Homer with crashing waves against the gorgeous Maine shore. Winslow Homer starts his career as an illustrator for a magazine, and he travels all through the Civil War, sketching and drawing and painting what he sees. So we have this. We don't know who he is, so he could represent all soldiers. Yeah. Called the veteran in the new field, Winslow Homer. Never married, dies in Maine, smart guy, spends his summers in Maine and his winters in the Caribbean and Florida. People are moving west. Expeditions are going west. We want to know what the land looks like. Presidents commission painters to go with these expeditions because photography hasn't yet become developed in this country, not the way it's starting in Europe. Remember, it takes a while for things to come across. It takes a while for things to cross the ocean. This is looking down Yosemite Valley in California. And this is Albert Bierstadt. Albert Bierstadt, born in Switzerland, moves to the United States as a very young child. Another artist who studied with Leutze at the Dusseldorf School, and someone who knew Cole, because Bierstadt was considered a Rocky Mountain landscape artist. Yosemite Valley. This is El Capitan, which is the mountain that people scale. And this is Sentinel Rock. Much larger than it actually is. Again, poetic, artistic license. No people, undeveloped. Quite gorgeous. 1865, the war is over. We have a lovely, lovely sky, which represents to me hope, a new future. Albert Bierstadt. Photograph of Abraham Lincoln, done in February of 1865. The war ends in April, and 7 days later, Lincoln is assassinated. This is done in February of 1865. He is 55 years old. And notice again, we have very simple clothing. Another president who chooses not to look presidential in a way. He's part of the people. He's part of the people. And this is Alexander Gardner. Now, many people think this was a Mathew Brady because Mathew Brady is associated with photographing the Civil War. Alexander Gardner was his assistant who traveled with him. And when Brady started to lose his eyesight, Gardner took over Brady's studio. Gardner photographs the execution of the conspirators who killed Lincoln. Alexander Gardner. This photograph was meant to be used as a sitting for a painting of Lincoln. Well, the photograph far surpassed the painting, which is not a very good one. Alexander Gardner. Born in Scotland, comes here to this country as a young boy. And he goes on to photograph many Native American tribes. Lincoln. Well, here we are on the Schuylkill River, which is in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the home of the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, which was the first art school in this country. It opens in 1805. It starts giving classes in 1810, but doesn't really assume the level of and the quality of teaching that European art schools have, because artists up till this point all went to Europe to study. Dusseldorf, Germany, École des Beaux-Arts, Paris. They all went to Europe to study. 1870, Thomas Eakins comes back from Paris after spending 4 years being tremendously influenced by the Impressionists. And I hope you see some of the influence in the water. This is John Biglin. John Biglin was the best skull racer at this time. It actually had a brother, best skull racer at this time. And so we look at the wonderful sky, by the way. When Eakins was in Paris and he was at the Beaux-Arts, he was able to copy, sculpt, draw, paint from nude models. That could never have happened in this country. It was not appropriate. I hope you see the influence of the nude model, because look at the musculature. You can only paint or sculpt the body if you've studied it in person, in life. So he comes back in 1870 and he says, I'd like to have nude models so that my students have a realistic view of the body. And the Philadelphians said, the Board of Trustees said, absolutely not. So what he would do is he would gather his male students, no women yet, he would gather his male students in the studio. He would lock the door. He would ask one of his students to take their clothes off, and he would use that student as a model. Well, when the Board of Trustees found out that he was doing that, they canceled. He canceled him, they canceled his classes, and he was out. Thomas Eakins. Another Hudson River artist who went west and tours Yellowstone. But while he was in that area, he went to Wyoming, to the Green River. And he also takes poetic license. The river is not nearly this wide. These rock formations are not nearly this tall. No people again, but one little sign of life. Do you see this down here? Yes, it's a bird. And the bird is here so that our eye is drawn to this, which is the way he signed his artwork, with a T and with an M. This is Thomas Moran, and the name of this painting is The Golden Hour. You can imagine the effect that these landscapes had on people back east in this country and living in cities. These landscape paintings of the West were responsible for the huge rush of settlers across the country. Thomas Moran. Born in England, but came here as a child, lived in Philadelphia. He often paints the Rocky Mountains. Yeah, I happen to think he's an excellent painter that most people are not familiar with. Thomas Moran. The Golden Hour. Very romanticized views of the West. The artist who was in competition with Mr. Whistler to paint the wealthy and the socially acknowledged. This is John Singer Sargent, and this wonderful young lady whose name is Elizabeth Winthrop Chandler. Her mother was the granddaughter of John Jacob Astor. So we're talking socialite. Philadelphia. Notice the technique, black on black, very, very difficult to do because the black often looks flat, and he manages to have us see that it's got a sheen, it's got an overskirt. She's looking right at us. She's elegant. She's 26 years old here. She's not married. And it's done in his studio. This painting and this painting are done by Sargent. This is a Madonna and Child. And he uses this Madonna and Child as an influence on her face. He said Elizabeth has the face of the Madonna and the eyes of Christ. John Singer Sargent, an expatriate who was born in Italy. His parents actually moved there because his older brother had died of the flu. That's why he was born in Italy. And Sargent, when he stopped painting famous and wealthy people, he said, every time I paint a portrait, I lose a friend. He said, so that's the end of my portrait career. Yes, she's quite lovely. And she's looking right at us. And does she know who she is? You bet. You bet. This is another Philadelphia socialite. Her name is Mrs. Robert Abbey. And this portrait was done by a woman whose name is Cecilia Beaux, who was very accomplished as a portraitist in Philadelphia. She was the first female faculty member of the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, the first. And she served many, many years in that position. She does paintings of the Roosevelt family. She does a painting of Georges Clemenceau, who was the Prime Minister of France during the First World War. Cecilia Beaux, B-E-A-U-X, never marries, felt that being married would hamper her career, both as an educator and as a painter. She got many proposals, and one gentleman who proposed to her, who she turned down, ultimately marries her sister. The thing that I love on this is the jet on the gown. Beautifully done. Cecilia Beaux, excuse me, painted Mrs. Robert Abbey, who was a great philanthropist and also a supporter of women's rights. Hence, I think this is the reason she chose Beaux to do it. And the artist William Merritt Chase, I think you might know that name, thought so highly of Cecilia Beaux and her talent that he said, not only is she the best female painter, but she's the best painter. Yes, and we're going to end with a piece of sculpture, another piece of sculpture. Frederic Remington, an artist who did many paintings and sculpture of the American West, but hardly ever went there. Another artist who romanticized the West for people who lived in the East. Remington was pro-US cavalry, against Native Americans. He was rather bigoted. And this is the first piece of sculpture he does. He did a painting of this, and then he sculpted. This was his first piece of sculpture. There are 70 copies of this, one of them being at Chicago Institute of Art. And one of them was in the Oval Office when Trump was president, and Trump was fond of telling everybody that this was Theodore Roosevelt, but that's not true. This was done in 1895. And when people said, well, why did you stop painting and why did you start sculpting? Remington said, my oils will get old, watercolor will fade, but I will endure in bronze. And sure enough, he's right. Sure enough, he's right. So let me go over all of these American artists. Now, I want you to also keep in mind that during the Second World War, okay, a huge number of European artists came to this country, which changed the way Americans portrayed their own country and changed art forever. But up until this point, American art had a message, which is not really true of European art, had a message about a new country, about fresh starts, about things that nobody ever saw in the world because we have such unique geography here and such unique geology and plants, animals, and people. Yeah. I want to go over very quickly with you, very quickly. Itinerant artist, Katharina Ellendorf. First known portraitist, John Smibert. Bostonian Society. John Singleton Copley, influenced tremendously by Smibert, paints Paul Revere as an accomplished, successful craftsman. And not as a hero, and not as a hero of the revolution yet, because this is before that. This was done in 1768. Gilbert Stuart, no formal training, no formal art school. He apprenticed to another painter. That's 114 of these exact poses, 114. Thomas Cole, Hudson River landscape artist. America is changing. It's going from the wild to being settled, to being tamed, manifest destiny. John James Audubon. Capture birds that are going to become extinct and exposes Europeans to things that they'd never seen before. So we're starting to get an appetite for America and American things and American art. Emanuel Leutze, great patriot, Dusseldorf School of Art, Germany, an artist, Worthington Whitridge, the wrong flag, the wrong time of day, the wrong boat, and going in the wrong direction. George Caleb Bingham, an American election in the Midwest. Get them drunk and make sure they vote for the right person. No secret ballot then. And no women. Women couldn't vote. All men. And certainly no blacks. Forebears. Chief of the Mandan. Forebears. Chief of the Mandan. Painted by George Catlin, who admired the Native Americans and who painted them in a very respectful way. Benjamin Franklin, done by Hiram Powers, born in Vermont, moves to Florence so that he gets access to a much finer quality of marble, and becomes the best known American sculptor in Europe. So this again starts enhancing American art on the continent. Whistler. Signature way too large. Detract from the lovely young lady. Nobody's paying him for this painting. But he does find a place to put it in the Peacock Room, in the home owned by Frances Leland, his #1 patron. And there she is. The returned veteran, Northern soldier, pictured as perhaps the Grim Reaper, but no, this is a gorgeous wheat field, and many of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War were in wheat fields, by the way. Winslow Homer, yes. Looking down Yosemite Valley, Albert Bierstadt, another Hudson River artist who studies in Dusseldorf. We still don't really have a well-recognized American art school, not yet. This is 1865. War is over, future is hopeful. Lincoln, 3 months before he's assassinated. At the age of 55, this is Alexander Gardner. A photograph that was used as a sample for a painting so that Lincoln didn't have to sit for it. Schuylkill River, John Biglin in A Single Skull, Philadelphia, 1873. Thomas Eakins, who did this in not oil, but watercolor, is now the head of the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, which, by the way, is still open. It is now a museum and it is still an art school. And he, after 4 years in Europe, brings European artistic techniques to this country. And so now we can stay in this country and study art. We do not need to go to Europe. The Golden Hour, Thomas Moran. Another romanticized view of the West, but this kind of thing encouraged people to move from the East and to settle the rest of the country. Elizabeth Chandler, classic John Singer Sargent socialite portrait. Anybody who was anybody wanted Sargent to paint them, except Mrs. Robert Abbey, who chose a woman artist, Cecilia Bow. Bow was the first woman faculty member at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art. She taught there for many years. And as I had said, she never married because she felt that being married would hamper her career. And Mr. Remington, the Bronco Buster, 70 of these. Remington, who did not spend very much time out west at all, but reimagined and romanticized the West for people in the East. Oh, yes. Here I am back again. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of quick run through of about almost 200 years of American art, which developed in a completely different way because it really didn't have the opportunity to be totally influenced by the European techniques. So it was wonderful to spend this time with you. I thank you very, very much. Be well, be healthy, and we'll see you again. And if you have any questions, please speak to Wendy. I'd be more than happy to answer them for you. Thank you again.